Hello, I want to welcome you all to the Power of Our Story. Um, every Wednesday night at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, we will have a weekly storytelling evening where each one of our 29 authors of our book, Wounds to Wisdom, Healing Through Veteran and First Responder Narratives, will read their story from the book. Our collaborative effort is a labor of love from all of us to those protectors who may be suffering in silence. All are welcome. Tonight, I want to welcome Daniel Torrez. Daniel Torrez, Deputy Director with the National Center for Victims of Crime, helped establish the first Victim Offender Dialogue, VOD, program in Arizona, conducting several dialogues and experiencing firsthand the restorative justice and healing effect on all participants. Daniel served 21 years as a military police officer in the U.S. Army and participated in humanitarian disaster relief efforts, United States Nations Peacekeeping, and combat operations. He served as a patrol supervisor, victims advocate, SRT, SWAT member, non-lethal weapons instructor, master trainer, and was a member of the 3rd US Infantry, the Old Guard. Daniel has also served as a federal law enforcement officer and university director of public safety. He holds a master's degree from Webster University, a bachelor's degree, and certified public manager designation from Arizona State University. He currently lives in Phoenix, Arizona with his lovely wife, Melissa, their cat, Sadie, and their dog, Ayers, the dog of war. Daniel, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
It's good to have you, and we can't wait to hear you share your story.
All right, so let's get into it. So my story is chapter 21, Unpacking My Emotional Rucksack. Before the badge. At an early age, I wanted to become a police officer or a firefighter. This was a result of regularly watching 1970s cop shows and the television series Emergency. Despite growing up in a middle-class Roman Catholic family, I felt my dream slipping away due to my affinity for finding trouble as a teenager. On track to becoming a fifth-year senior, it took me 5 years plus summer school to graduate. Ultimately, a positive police encounter during a beer run solidified my goal of becoming a police officer. I enlisted in the Army at the age of 17 to serve my country and gain law enforcement experience. I was proud to follow in the footsteps of my dad and brother by serving in the military. On July 12, 1985, I was at home with my mom, dad, and younger sister. While in the shower, I heard my mom yelling and knocking on the door. My gut told me that something had happened to my dad. He had recently decided to leave the hospital to be with his family, despite his cancer prognosis. Hurriedly, I dried off, put on some clothes, and went to my parents' bedroom where I found my dad unresponsive. He had quietly passed away. I had to be there for my mom and younger sister while notifying my brothers that our dad was gone. I could have canceled my enlistment because of my dad's cancer. I chose not to, based on a conversation I had with him 2 weeks before he passed. He told me he believed in me and that he was proud of me. He also said, "A Torrez never quits." After the ambulance took my dad away, I went to my parents' bedroom and felt engulfed in the stench of death. It's a very distinct smell when cancer has eaten away at the body. I would experience this stench a few more times in the Army. I didn't cry when my dad passed away or at his funeral 4 days later. I was too angry. I was ready to be all you can be. I left home 3 weeks later for Fort McClellan, Alabama. Advanced training taught me what it took to be a great MP. Don't let things get to you and show no emotion. I could never have imagined what an expert I would become at stuffing my emotions into my rucksack. Behind the badge. My first duty station was Fort Hood, Texas. I immersed myself in becoming the best MP I could be. I volunteered for training, learning from both great and bad leaders. The old timers made it seem normal to hit the bars after duty and stay out all night, regardless of when they had to report for duty. I was reacting negatively and not responding appropriately to the trauma I experienced. Alcohol became my crutch, along with high-risk behaviors, fighting, and off-duty conduct that pushed the limit. It was the stench of death from my first medical emergency call that took me back to my parents' bedroom. I arrived before the paramedics to find a young mother screaming, "Save my baby." The woman's 14-year-old daughter was on the couch, surrounded by the stench of death. I knew in my heart she had passed. She was pale and cold to the touch. Leukemia took her. To put the mother at ease, I moved the girl onto the carpet and began CPR. Relieved, she said, "Thank you for saving my baby." The paramedics arrived and looked at me as if to say, "What are you doing? She's gone." As I glanced toward the mother, they understood and took over CPR. I turned in my report and got a "good job" from the desk sergeant. It was 1986. There were no debriefs or "how are you doing?" So the trauma from that incident, the death of a fellow MP, and other critical incidents were stuffed into my rucksack with my emotions. The anger, drinking, fighting, and high-risk behaviors were steadily mounting. I asked my leadership for help, but received little. Many of my senior leaders had served in Vietnam. They followed the pseudo concept: suck it up and drive on. Still trying to grieve, I asked the one person I knew who could help me, a Catholic chaplain. I poured my heart out with anticipation of some priestly guidance. Instead, he handed me a pamphlet and told me to read it. Strike one. I threw the pamphlet away, and it was business as usual. A few months later, I sought help again. This time, he handed me a book on how to grieve the loss of a loved one. Strike two. No need to ask for help for a third time. My trajectory was set. I would suppress my emotions and be all I could be. I followed this trajectory throughout my 21-year Army career that involved many more critical incidents, including traffic fatalities, drownings, dismembered bodies, humanitarian disaster relief, United Nations peacekeeping, and combat operations. After the badge. After retiring from the Army, I returned home to Phoenix and began working with the Arizona Department of Corrections. My grant-funded position was to help develop a restorative justice program. The Victim Offender Dialogue, VOD program, brought victims of violent crime face-to-face with their offender. I conducted several successful dialogues, primarily with homicide and sex offense victims. As the new grant cycle approached, I was eager to help give victims a voice they had not had before as they navigated their journey toward healing. Regrettably, someone in my agency did not seek renewal of my position. This decision was made in April of 2020, but I did not find out until late July. It was a huge gut punch that completely took my breath away. I was in a state of controlled aggression. Could I stuff these feelings in my rucksack on top of all the trauma from the previous 35 years? I told my lovely wife I would be unemployed as of October 1st. I think she was even more outraged than me. I didn't feel I was mentally ready to stay with the agency, so I began looking for a new job. I felt shame and disappointment as I was not going to be able to provide for my family. I was in a dark place and in a downward spiral. Alcohol became my crutch again, and I thought to myself, this could all end if. I never did complete that thought, and it never entered my mind again. Thanks to my lovely wife for having my back and reassuring me that we would be okay. Revitalized with the intestinal fortitude to move forward, I realized I had been in much worse situations. I took another role in a different department, and I'm grateful for the few executive leaders who offered support throughout my transition. The situation had such a profound effect on me, I decided to seek additional support. In October 2021, I found the power of our story, a platform whose mainstay is connection and non-judgmental support. In sharing my story, I allowed myself to be vulnerable. I felt my emotional rucksack emptying as I began my journey of self-discovery. Being a part of this tribe helped me seek mental health support. I began therapy in June 2022 and was diagnosed with PTSD. My vulnerability became my strength. It feeds my resilience. I reclaimed my identity and lost the persona I was clinging to since graduating from Ranger School. I realized it was okay to be Daniel versus Ranger Torrez. Ranger Torrez is a part of me, but it's not who I am. I am a husband, father, servant leader, combat veteran, and advocate. After presenting my story at a first responder conference, a young firefighter asked me what would have helped change my trajectory as a young MP. Life may have been different had the chaplain listened without judgment and offered support. It has been a long road to self-discovery and accepting my PTSD diagnosis. I decided to disable the label and continue to be vulnerable. I developed my own way of continuing to prevail. I call it the AARR method. Accept, acknowledge, respond appropriately, and reach out when needed. I applied it as I emerged from the darkness and downward spiral. I had to AARR my dad's death. I accepted it, acknowledging the impact he had on my life, and responding appropriately by sharing both his story and mine. It took reaching out to the power of our story and seeking mental health support. The ability to seek support is possible at any stage of one's career. My trajectory may have changed if the young MP in me would have sought support even after the chaplain failed. If you are experiencing job-related trauma, it is never too early or too late to seek support. This is especially true when you are living out your childhood dream, like I was.
Daniel, thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate it.